The first question is, when did you have your first Black teacher and what was that experience like?
Yeah, so I had my first Black teacher actually in sixth grade, and her name was Mrs. Diet. She was my English teacher, and we had pretty much like an instant rapport, instant connection. And I didn't really think about it until recently, but I just felt like she was really invested in my academic growth and personal growth. So it was middle school.
What does the Black Lives Matter movement mean to you?
Yeah, so the Black Lives Matter movement has really deeply impacted me on many levels and layers. I was in grad school when Trayvon Martin was murdered, and I distinctly just remember that having like causing a huge shift in my political life and social advocacy life. I'd always been interested like in Black history and Black studies and all of that. But I think that moment just really kind of was a reawakening and reignited my passion for social justice and really wanting to make a difference in the educational setting because that's where I felt like I could make the most difference. The Black Lives Matter movement to me is also a great example of what the people can accomplish together. It's really a decentralized movement. There's not one charismatic leader that's leading it. It's really kind of a grassroots movement, and it's a great example of what we can all accomplish together.
And then the final question is, what has your experience been working in a predominantly white institution?
Yeah, so I've been lucky to have a lot of different experiences in life. I went to a predominantly Black elementary and middle school, then a PWI for high school. So it's interesting to be back here. Um, I think that there's pros and cons like any organization. There's a lot of great things that happen. You have a lot of access to resources that you might not otherwise have. I think generally speaking, as a whole, a lot of Americans have kind of psychologically distanced themselves, oftentimes unconsciously, from the just inequities of racism and racist policy. There's a thought that, if my ancestors weren't involved in slavery, then I might not have as personal of a stake in it as, if I thought that my ancestors were doing some bad things. So I think that attitude has really just permeated virtually every organization. There's like limits to how invested that we are in advancing racial equity initiatives. Even if we think that, we're doing a lot, I think that that's a barrier to overcome. So sometimes it can feel like progress is really slow, and I think that's one of the reasons. But yeah, it's a mixed bag, but a lot of great things and a lot of work still to be done.
Okay, so the first question is when did you have your first Black teacher and what was that experience like?
Sure. So I was in third grade, and I went to public school in Howard County. She was very old-fashioned, so I didn't. I felt like there was representation of myself, but she wasn't really like your warm and fuzzy typical third grade teacher, I guess. I remember doing long division with her. Those are some of the few things that I remember.
Why is it important for all students, especially Black kids, to have teachers from a diverse background?
Well, diversity is, if you look around, that's what we have in this country. So not everyone is white, and it's important to embrace culture and diversity in various ways. And so as kids grow up, they need to, again, see those reflections of who they are.
What does the Black Lives Matter movement mean to you?
Empowerment, connection, understanding.
And our last question is, what has your experience been working in a predominantly white institution?
Well, I feel like that's a loaded question. I can definitely say my first job was at a private school in the suburbs of Atlanta, and I was the first Black teacher hired. I think there was an understanding of like, that's just kind of the culture, like I was always the minority. I guess the short answer is sometimes tokenism. Feeling like you're a token and feeling like you have that pressure to make sure that you're just as good, if not better.
Yeah.
When did you have your first Black teacher and what was that experience like?
My first Black teacher was probably ninth grade. I had some teachers of color in grade school. But what it was like, I probably had about 4 or 5 teachers throughout high school. And the two teachers really stood out to me. They were amazing. They always had like open door policy with me. They showed me a lot of guidance, and they really encouraged me to push myself and to realize the potential that I had, like despite some kind of maybe negative feelings I had about myself due to my situation, my skin color, and those sorts of things. So they're a positive influence for sure.
Why is it important for all students, especially Black kids, to have teachers from a diverse background?
Yeah, I think diversity is really important, even in the wider context of just like diversity of thought, perspective, social class, background. But specifically for Black students, I think it's important because oftentimes, especially just in my own life, we can kind of get this idea that the validity of learning or education information only comes from a very homogeneous source. So getting diverse teachers involved allows for those students to be able to see, okay, like there's not just one way to learn, there's not just one way of receiving information from a particular group of people.
What does the Black Lives Matter movement mean to you?
The Black Lives Matter for me means recognizing the full humanity of Black people and African Americans in the United States, and all of our like strengths and all of our faults and our pain and our suffering and in our like glory, but also recognizing us as individuals and not just as like a collective, right? That we all are unique, even within a particular ethnicity or a race.
All right, the last question is, what has your experience been working in a predominantly white institution?
So this is my first year. It's actually been really good. I've had a great experience so far. I definitely recognize that my understanding so far is pretty limited because I've only been here for so long, and because of COVID, I haven't had the opportunity to engage as much as I would like in the culture at Friends, getting to know more students and getting to know more faculty and staff across divisions. So with that being said, I definitely also know that there's historically been some things that need to be changed, and I hope that as we continue to hire and support more diverse faculty and teachers, that we can continue to build an equitable and just school.